The Premier League is crazy. While we know Liverpool are going to win, we know who's going to get relegated. The battle for Champions League is insane. Like Nottingham Forest, and I feel gutted for them if they do, but they could drop out. I think I'd be most worried if I was a Chelsea fan because I think Chelsea have looked the poorest out of all these sides since Christmas. But today's game was Newcastle won 4 in a row. Villa won 4 in a row. These were the two form teams in the Premier League. Newcastle just battered Crystal Palace after battering Manchester United. Newcastle, excellent squad, been unbelievable this season. But Aston Villa are in fine form. They beat PSG at home. You know, maybe if Unai Emery had kept Rashford on longer because he was in the zone, maybe they could have taken that game to extra time. But they were well and truly in that game, and they've been ridiculously good lately. And I was like, this is going to be an insane game. I was looking forward to this game. And it was an insane game. It did not disappoint. And it tells you everything you need to know about the Premier League. It's not the big six anymore in the Premier League because Man United and Tottenham are like, you know, like the Villa and the Villa and the Newcastles. They're like the two big teams that want to end this sort of big six stuff. And what a game it was! And I tell you what, when Callum Wilson, Kraft, people like Longstaff are coming off Newcastle's bench. Sorry, not Longstaff. Target coming off Newcastle's bench, and Aston Villa can bring on Rashford and Jacob Ramsey and Marlon. You know what? Squad depth. That's Newcastle's biggest weakness, and that's Villa's biggest strength. And I owe Villa a little bit of an apology actually, because when I did my sort of talk back in maybe January, I said Villa just haven't been that good at the start of the season. Obviously, they had injuries and stuff, and I didn't think Villa would get Champions League. I said I thought Villa were not going to get Champions League football back in January, and I think a lot of Villa fans were doubting it. I think Villa fans were thinking, "Oh, can we just get that Europa?" You know, I thought, oh no, they won't get that Champions League. But the way that Chelsea have fallen off, you know, obviously City's fall off, and how good Villa had been. And I think Villa, again, another example of if you invest in January, look what happens. But they've been ridiculously good. And right now they deserve Champions League football. I think it could be Forest that drop out for Villa. I don't think Chelsea are going to do it. I think it could be Forest, which would be a shame for Forest. Maybe City drop off. City haven't been great. But I know Newcastle had a bad game today, but they've been very good this season. They won't drop out. So let's talk about Villa. I apologise, Villa. I think you're going to get Champions League football. Maatsen, he's really improved these last month or two, hasn't he? Konza, one of the most underrated defenders in the league. He's been phenomenal. Kamara and Tielemans, probably the most underrated midfield partnership. Kamara, I think him returning from injury, I almost feel like he's Villa's most important player. You hear a lot about Watkins, you hear a lot about Morgan Rogers, but from my perspective of what I've seen over since Unai Emery's come in, I feel like Kamara is like the glue sometimes for Villa. You know, Morgan Rogers obviously special player. Watkins was probably man of the match today, but Tielemans was a close second. Watkins, you know, phenomenal runs in it from second one. And I think the first half was more even. Villa started better. Newcastle got back into it, very even. And Newcastle smashed Villa like the last 3 or 4 meetings. So I think, you know, with both teams in good form, Newcastle were almost the favourites in that sense, despite Villa's good home record, because of how they'd smashed them in the past. But I thought the way that Villa came out in that second half was absolutely phenomenal. So let's talk about Villa, and then I'm going to talk about Newcastle. So I'm going to do what we learned on Villa, and then I'll talk about Newcastle. So Villa just beat an informed Newcastle side that had just been blowing teams away. They battered, I support Man United, us at the weekend, us last weekend. They battered Crystal Palace midweek. Maybe there's a bit of exhaustion there. I always said with Newcastle, they've done really well this season because they're not in Europe and they weren't playing 2 games a week. And they did really well 2 seasons ago. And then they got Champions League and they fell off a bit because they were playing so much. They kept picking up more and more injuries. And I think the tiredness showed. I think Newcastle really need to invest in that squad depth, which Villa, you know, have all their players back, the investment in January. Villa had that squad depth to come off the bench today. But Villa in that second half were phenomenal. You know, Unai Emery has only lost 4 league games at home in his last 2 seasons. There's an unbeaten run that stands at 16 games. The fact that Unai Emery has come into Villa and he's having these unbeaten runs and getting Villa in the Champions League, that's a phenomenal achievement. You know, they were solid in the first half, but it was the way they came out in the second half, Villa. The game was up for grabs in the second half. It could have gone either way. I think Villa started better, but it was up for grabs. But then the second half, Villa come out and it's Villa's game. You know, the energy, the movement. I felt that Newcastle struggled. Maybe they were a bit tired from the midweek game, although Villa had played in midweek. I don't know what it was, but they looked more tired. And I thought, you know, Unai Emery's tactics were spot on. I think Villa were aggressive, they were organised, and they were pretty clinical as well. So I think Ollie Watkins gets man of the match, instant impact goal, assist, but he was winning his duels. He held up play well, he pressed relentlessly. he was back to his best today. He worked so hard today, Ollie Watkins, running, chasing, eagerness. And I feel like I always praise Newcastle United for their energy, their work rate, their pressing. They've got the best high press in the Premier League. Tonali Bruno-Guimaraes is one of the best Premier League midfields. But Villa managed to suffocate them today. Villa managed to be up for it more, which is something that Newcastle always do. They're always up for it. The big games, the Arsenals, the Liverpool and the Carabao Cup final. Newcastle, they're always up for it. But today, Villa were up for it more. Yuri Tielemans. It's so difficult to pick my Premier League team of the season because you've got Alexis McAllister that's been unbelievable. Moises Caicedo's easily been Chelsea's best player this season. You've got Yuri Tielemans that's been unbelievable. Bruno Fernandes that's been unbelievable. Tonali that's been unbelievable. There's so many midfielders that have had ridiculously good seasons. But Yuri Tielemans, he has to be a solid shout for team of the season. Like, how good he's been. Most passes today, most tackles, most duels won. Not only is he completely press resistant, not only is he one of the best passing midfielders in the game, the amount of good passes he makes. He always has a passing masterclass nearly every game. But he can make tackles and he can win duels. It's not just, he's good and pretty on the ball, but he's also good off the ball. He makes the tackles, he wins the duels, he brought the physicality. He got really stuck in. He has been at just this different level. I remember him being that 16, 17-year-old wonder kid. And he's looking like that wonder kid. Could he be that level? He's that level right now. I think Camara's return, obviously big push. And I look, Ramsey, Onana, Rashford, Marlon, to bring those kind of players on. When Newcastle are bringing on Kraft, Target, Callum Wilson's been atrocious this season. I know he's had injuries. It definitely made that difference in the second half. I think the energy was there. I want to talk about Newcastle in a second, but I do think that, Villa's football is really good to watch. I think Villa were really good to watch in the way that they were playing. I think since February, you've just stepped up a lot. I think key players like Camara back obviously help. Cons has been excellent. I think, when you look at Villa's strongest starting 11 and bench, everybody fit, it's a very good team. Matson's really starting to show why he was brought in. I think he had defensive liabilities at the beginning, but he's looking so much better. But they made the game physical. They made the game intelligent. They played really good passes into Watkins in behind. They pressed with intensity. And, in January, I didn't think Villa had a chance to get in UCL football. I didn't say they didn't have a chance, but I was like, Villa will probably finish 8th. Villa can finish 4th, 5th, 4th, 5th, maybe even 3rd. You never know. I think Newcastle, Villa, and Man City, Arsenal, and Liverpool will be the top 5. I think Forest will drop out. I think Chelsea will drop out. But even in their narrow midweek loss to PSG, they showed they were there. I do think Rashford should have stayed on versus PSG, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a Man United fan. I just think he should have. But Emre has built a very good side. I thought Newcastle, they're below their usual level. I thought they were defensively weak. And I think this is a reminder to Newcastle, there's still a work in progress. Despite Newcastle being excellent, despite Newcastle deservedly being 3rd in the Premier League because they've been unreal, and at times they've been better than Arsenal this season. Liverpool's the only side that I can say has comfortably been better than Newcastle when Newcastle are at their best this season. They're a work in progress, and today shows that. There's been 4 games now where they've conceded 4+ goals. They have vulnerabilities. They do need a centre-back. Botman obviously being injured is a huge loss. Today they were overrun in midfield, but their midfield is insane. So that was just a one-off. But it was a one-off bad night. And I don't think Newcastle fans can be too upset because they've been phenomenal lately. It's only if they lose Champions League to Villa, they might look back at this and go, oh. The Newcastle have been unbelievable, and it's a one-off bad night. You get bad nights. Liverpool had a really bad game against Forest. Not Forest. Well, they did actually against Forest, but against Fulham. They're still going to win the league. It's one of those one-off bad games for Newcastle. But I think it just shows that, there are players at Newcastle that are capable of losing 4-0 in the Premier League. They've still got players from that Steve Bruce era. And Eddie Howe and Jason Tindall have got the best out of those players. But there are Newcastle players that have got where Eddie Howe's got every bit of the best bit of them out. Where I look at the Newcastle squad and I think, Eddie Howe's got everything out of that squad. But there's still a fair bit to do. Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes have been 2 of the best midfielders in the league this season, but they were second best to Tielemans and Kamara tonight. You can't just rely on them, You've got Isak. I don't think he had much service today. It wasn't his kind of game. But there was a lack of intensity and control, particularly in that second half. And I think it was exhaustion. I think where Newcastle having trouble is depth. They need a centre-back and maybe a striker. Well, I say striker. Someone that's going to play right wing / striker. The number 1 position is centre-back, long-term Shaw replacement. The number 2 position, you're looking at Mbeumo, someone that can push Jacob Murphy and be back up to Isak, so you're not super reliant on him. Lewis Miley, rumoured to go. Joe Willock, Longstaff, rumours of them going. You need another midfielder for depth. You obviously lost Elliot Anderson. Fullback, I think Lewis Hall and Livramento are great. Trippier's good, but you just need that other one for depth, and potentially a goalkeeper. You know, the current squad is done so well, but to sustain the top four, you're going to need that more quality. Kraft, Target, Wilson. Obviously, I know Gordon came off the bench, but compared to Villa's, no wonder Villa was so much better in the second half when they had those options. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. I think Newcastle will still have a good season. I think it's a one-off bad game. I thought Villa were excellent and have been for a while. Same with Newcastle apart from today. Thank you for watching. Bye.